My guest is Dr. David Trim, a historian who is also the Director of Archives and Statistics and Research at the Seventh-day Adventist World Headquarters. David, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Gary.
What we're going to talk about are some of the Adventist pioneers who have been very significant for the mission of the church. Who are we going to look at?
We're going to talk about John Corliss and William Spicer, Gary.
Wonderful, names that I am familiar with. Tell me about Elder Corliss.
Corliss is interesting. He has a personal connection in a sense with us, because without Corliss, the church in Australia, where we both grew up, would not have developed in the same way.
I have a lot to thank him for.
Indeed. You know, Corliss doesn't spend all his life as a missionary, but he does have some significant periods in mission service. He was born just after Christmas in 1845. He was originally a Baptist, but he became a Seventh-day Adventist when he was just 23. And in 1868, he became the chaplain at what was then called the Western Health Reform Institute. That became Battle Creek Sanitarium. That is the first Adventist healthcare institution.
Yes. And
he became its chaplain when it was only 2 years old. So he plays a really key role in forming the Adventist health work. He then, later in the 1870s and 80s, works as a minister and evangelist right across the United States. But a key date comes in 1885, when he goes with Elder S.N. Haskell and others as the first Adventist missionaries to Australia.
Wow.
And of course that is when the church in Australia gets founded. As with many countries in the world, Gary, Adventists had been there before the first missionaries came because they'd read Adventist literature.
Right.
But these are the first party of Adventist missionaries who go to Australia. And so, in a sense, everything that happens with the church in Australia, which is still sort of a powerhouse for Adventism, comes from their work. And Corliss was particularly important because he conducted evangelistic campaigns in Melbourne and Adelaide and some other Australian cities, which were tremendously successful. He won large numbers of converts, including a few from the upper classes, which, as you know, Adventists don't always reach. And that was important because their tithes and offerings helped to sustain the church. And so really without Corliss and his evangelistic series, the church in Australia just wouldn't have taken off.
Now, when he went to Australia, who did you say he went with?
S.N. Haskell, Stephen Haskell.
Stephen Haskell.
And Haskell himself, you know, it would be a good subject for another time perhaps.
Oh yeah, he was particularly close with Ellen White, of course. Yeah.
Indeed, indeed.
So these men went with their families, got on a boat, went all the way to Australia. I mean, that wasn't easy back then.
No, indeed. It's a journey of weeks to go across the Pacific, not like today. I mean, it seems long enough now flying across the Pacific, but much longer then. And you know, a quite alien society. Australia and the United States were similar in some ways, both being sort of frontier societies, but of course Australia had been founded by Britain as a colony, and so it would have been alien to them in many ways, but they were willing to do it. They were enthusiastic, and Corliss, as I say, plays this key role as an evangelist, but also he establishes the first Adventist magazine, the first church paper in Australia, the Bible Echo. Which also it helped to knit the church together and won more people, won new converts as well. And he remained in Australia for 2 years. Then he went back to California because he had some health problems. But he went to Australia again and was there for another 3 years, from 1893 to 1896. And of course that was the stage when Ellen White was also there. But he returns to the States in 1896, and then his key role thereafter for a while was in religious liberty. And he actually appeared before a U.S. Senate committee to testify about a proposed Sunday law. It's often remembered that A.T. Jones was the great hero of religious liberty, but Corliss was as involved as Jones was, and he helped to stop those moves towards a national Sunday law in the 1890s.
Now tell us about the second man, Elder Spicer, very significant for Adventist mission.
Spicer could not be more significant, actually, you know, Gary. Spicer's the man who creates Adventist mission, I would say. He himself served as a missionary. He went to England when he was just 22, helped set up the work there, came back to America to be the Foreign Mission Secretary of the General Conference. And because of his work while he was there, that was one of the reasons they were able to buy the land on which they established Salusi Mission, which is today Salusi University. And then he went to India. He went to India in 1898, and for 3 years he was the only ordained minister in the whole of Southern Asia. He founded the Adventist periodical there. He really set the work on a good foundation. And then he goes back to America to be the secretary of the Foreign Mission Board, but the following year, 1902, he became secretary of the General Conference. And for nearly 20 years, he was the secretary of the General Conference. Now, a lot of viewers won't know, but the secretariat of the GC is what's responsible for sending foreign missions. But how do you do that? How do you send foreign missionaries? You've got to do all the logistics of actually shipping them over, taking care of them, their families, bringing them back periodically for furloughs. It requires a huge infrastructure. That's the part of mission service we often don't talk about because it isn't glamorous. But Spicer creates the infrastructure that allows the Seventh-day Adventist Church to send foreign missionaries all around the world and to keep them there for long periods of time, which includes bringing them home from time to time. You know, and that's still a major part of the bureaucracy of the General Conference, but it's a necessary part. And that is really all the creation of William Ambrose Spicer. But there's one other key role he played. He himself traveled the world. Between 1900 and 1940, there were only 4 years in which he didn't go abroad to travel. And everywhere he went, he wrote articles for church papers. And I would say, Gary, that Spicer implanted worldwide missions in the Seventh-day Adventist DNA. So we have a huge amount to thank him for.
David, I wish we had a couple of hours because these are fascinating men, but thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Viewers at home, we have so much to be thankful for in terms of people who pioneered the way, who under God's guidance, under his blessing, had a vision. They worked hard. Many of them died young. Many actually went overseas for mission and they never came home. And it's that sort of pioneering service, that sort of commitment to mission that we build on today. And we thank them for what they have done. And we know that God's Spirit is still working today in men and women to fire them for mission.
To the Messiah, walking is a way of life. This morning they are walking to the Seventh-day Adventist Church to attend a seminar about HIV/AIDS.